Hey guys, Pete here. It's time for the Fargo Season 4 Episode 5 breakdown, and we lost one of the good ones. The birthplace of civilization delivers escalation on all fronts of the impending war between the Faddas and Loy Cannon's outfit. We get some backstory details, some violence, some connections to past seasons, and an awful lot of monologuing about America. All the necessary ingredients are there, including a big character moment to close things out, but still, somehow, the episode manages to feel like something's missing. I'll get into my thoughts about that after I recap the events of episode 5. This will include spoilers, so if you haven't watched the episode yet, this is your warning. Hit the subscribe button, go get caught up, and then come back to watch the breakdown. And with that out of the way, let's dive in because there is a lot to cover. One thing episode 5 doesn't have a lot of is Oraetta. There's just one scene. She's at work with a patient who's moaning in agony. She shushes him, and when that doesn't quiet him down, she resorts to banging her head against the wall. The scene is intertwined with Ethelrida working on a letter in her room. She's definitely thinking of turning Oraetta in, putting pen to paper to alert her boss, Dr. Harvard, about the nurse's hobby of killing off patients in her care. We don't find out if she actually sends the letter, though. Her father comes in to put her to bed and ends up giving up the location of Aunt Zelmare in the process. He tells her not to go looking for the fugitives and adds that she probably shouldn't be hanging out with Oraetta since he thinks she might have poisoned the pie that was left on their doorstep. The birthday girl doesn't listen to her dad, though. The next day, she makes her way to the New Paris Hotel. She's looking for advice and asks her aunt, who's trying to celebrate her birthday with a drink of whiskey, what she would do if she saw something wrong. Zelmare answers flatly that she wouldn't do anything, and this leads to an explanation of how they're not criminals, they're outlaws. Criminals play the game. While they break the rules of society, they still operate inside of it. Outlaws reject the game outright and therefore have no rules. Their crime is freedom. When pressed on what she is, the girl says that she's Ethelrida Pearl Smutny. She's one of a kind. I think this is probably one of the strongest parts of the episode, and when we see rules being imposed on them later, it underlines the situation that most of the characters of this story find themselves in. Loy's the one that's going to act as the rules imposer, and he starts off the episode handing off his stolen Fadda guns. Last week he mentioned Morty Kellerman, and this week we see him in the flesh. It's a direct connection to the opening flashback in the 4th episode of Season 2, which took place in 1951. When that's taken care of, he wants his guys to head over to his new funeral home to persuade the previous owners, the Smutnys, to give up the location of the women who robbed him. That's all interrupted by Otis, who enters the garage with a group of police officers. They arrest some of his crew. Otis takes the bag of cash that Loy was carrying, and we find out that he knows about the detective's time in the war, which I'll come back to. On his way out, Otis delivers the message to stick with the deal from the Faddas. Josto is also making moves. He's trying to show his brother Gaetano the right way to get things done. He has the police raid a jazz club where Loy's oldest son Lemuel's hanging out, getting him roughed up and arrested. Later at the Fadda house, he talks strategy with Rabbi Milligan, who's helping Satchel with his math homework. Josto thinks that his plan will work to get the Cannons to back down, and then with no war to fight, Gaetano will head back home to Italy. Rabbi disagrees on both points, telling him that his brother is there to take over. He warns him that his problem is a math problem. He has to divide his enemies or they'll multiply. After Josto leaves the room, Rabbi tells Satchel to be ready, saying, "When the shooting starts, we vanish." This seems to add more credence to the idea that we're looking at a young Mike Milligan from Season 2. Later, Josto pays a visit to the jail, where a large number of Loy's men are currently being held. He delivers a speech explaining that Americans like a crime story because America is a crime story. He says, "See, Johnny Society looks at me and they see a fella that's using crime to get ahead. But you, all they see is crime, and that's why you're going to lose." Rabbi lingers for a minute after he leaves, trying to find out how they think Loy will respond. He tells them to let their boss know that he'll keep his boys safe no matter what. Marshal Deafy shows up at Otis's place after seeing him raid the Cannons the night before. Looking around his place, he notices a photo of a woman on the wall. We learn this is his fiancée, who was raped and murdered while he was away fighting in the war. It ties into what Loy was saying at the warehouse earlier. There we find out that one of Otis's superior officers stepped on a mine in a field he said he'd swept. He took it as Otis folding under the pressure and not being able to do his job, when really he'd been laying in the grass not clearing the mines because he learned about his fiancée's murder. Otis doesn't want to go with him, so Deafy heads to Ethelrida's school alone. He lays out the crimes that Zelmare and Swanee committed, which landed them in prison. The teenager looks surprised to hear that her aunt killed a pregnant woman and her husband for less than $10, and that Swanee was involved in a bank robbery where a father of 3 is killed. Still, she holds her ground at first, and even fights back some when he suggests that she should act in a civilized manner. Picking up on the implied racism, she responds, "Civilized? You know, do you not, that Africa is the birthplace of civilization, which means both your ancestors and mine came from the same green savanna." After that, he just goes straight to threatening. He threatens to have her expelled if she doesn't give up where her aunt's hiding out, and then he makes his way to the new Paris. We find out that Loy's also on his way there. After an argument at home with his wife, he pays a visit to Turman and Debrel at the King of Tears. He explains that he knows they paid him with his own money and that he knows her sister was behind the robbery. Paying him with his own money is actually news to Debrel, and she tries to negotiate a solution. But Loy isn't sympathetic to their situation because he knows he has the upper hand. Turman starts to unravel, saying he didn't know where the money came from, and when Loy threatens their lives and Ethelrida's life, they know they have to tell him about the hotel. Deafy is racing through town to get there, and it looks like there might be a big confrontation brewing if they all arrive at the same time. Instead, Loy arrives first. After some discussion about the reality of their situation, he's able to turn the self-described outlaws to his side. There's a moment where Swanee pushes him to either kill them or rape them, where he says dying is too easy. They owe him, and he's putting them to work. He says he needs some invisible soldiers the other side won't be able to see coming. And this does make sense from his perspective. Overall, we see him doing a pretty good job of taking care of things, exerting his power and control where he can. But these two probably aren't going to work out the way he's hoping for. In an effort to get things in order, he's inviting a couple agents of chaos into his operation. And on the subject of chaos, I haven't gotten to Gaetano yet. He spent most of the episode with Constant, and it would seem that he's been in the US long enough to develop his thesis about what's wrong with Americans. He delivers this in an interaction with an unlucky waiter who happened to be outside taking a smoke break right in time to witness one of the episode's undeniably funny moments. He watches as Gaetano slips on the ice, and with the way it's set up, you know his being there is going to cost him dearly. He meets his end after serving a subpar cup of coffee to the Italian. The scene serves to reinforce all the things we put together about Gaetano and shows that he's fully capable of carrying out violence himself rather than just ordering someone else to do it. He then makes his way over to Spud's All Time, where Dr. Senator is surprised to see them instead of Abel. Gaetano just sort of sits in the back and eats a sundae. Constant delivers his origin story about arriving as a baby in a box after his mother died on the way to America. The point being that there's nothing tougher than an orphan who had to bring himself up from that situation. All things considered, it's not bad for an origin story. But I think what really defines this scene is Dr. Senator, he pretty much knows what's going down here. And we watch as he goes through the motions of having this conversation, listening, responding, interacting with the waitress, all while playing out the different scenarios of how he might get out of this situation in one piece. He manages to deliver the final word, as it were, saying, "I don't know how they do it in your country, but in America, respect is earned." Continuing, you're just boys making a mess that one day I'm going to have to clean up. Of course, that there would be a chance for that to happen turns out to be wishful thinking. Instead, Constant guns him down in the street, bringing his story to an end. Sometime later, after night falls, Loy arrives at the scene standing over his dead body. It's clear that this hits him hard, but as the sound of sirens pick up, they have to leave the scene and they have to leave his body behind. In a story where we know most of these characters are going to die, it shouldn't be surprising to see Dr. Senator go. But he was a standout character, built on a standout performance, so it is sad to see him go. At the very same time, this scene serves to highlight a problem with the season that I've been having a hard time putting into words. It's put together well. The look, the dialogue, the photography, it's all top notch, but the scene doesn't hit in a way that comes off as an exclamation point at the end of a great episode. It's as if the whole of this season so far isn't equal to the sum of all its parts. Rather than feeling tight and moving confidently towards something, it feels like a bunch of individual scenes thrown together. And that's not to say it's terrible, I'm not going to stop watching, but it feels like it could be better. Instead of being glued to the screen throughout and then left wanting to dive back into what I just saw, I find myself looking at the different things that happen, thinking, well, that's actually pretty good, and looking for ways to tell myself I enjoyed what I just watched. As a fan, I really hope the back half of this season can sort it out. There are a couple things that might be reasons for why it's happening. The pandemic did interrupt production. Things got pushed back. Post-production was probably affected by working remotely. I've also read that it turned out that they had too much to fit into 10 episodes, which meant that they had to add another one at the last minute. That's not something that you usually hear, and that could have caused problems for the natural ending points of the individual episodes. Regardless, from my perspective, the pacing and the momentum of things feels off. There's a lot going on, most of which is darn interesting with the potential to pay off, but these early episodes haven't been building the anticipation and confidence in where things are going in the way I would have expected. One particular example I'll point out is this interaction at the jail. I don't think it landed the way it was supposed to. The idea behind it's fine, that even though they're all looked down on, the Cannons have the worst of it based on the color of their skin. But it's not like Josto's providing some new insights here. The guys in the cell already know this. As viewers, we already know this. So while what he says is enjoyable on the surface, Americans like a crime story because America is a crime story, it's just sort of there. It's just sort of another thing that's said as another thing happens. It's kind of the same with Gaetano's murderous rampage and with the scene where Loy blows up on his wife. They're just sort of thrown in there, and I don't know that they accomplish what they're supposed to. And there are so many things to like in this episode. I really enjoy the back and forth between Zelmare and Swanee. I really like the idea that nobody says they're bad at English or nobody's proud of it, the way that Rabbi pointed this out to Josto. And Deafy and Oraetta pretty much steal every scene that they're in. And I think that's a good place to leave it because that's where I'm at. I did notice a couple of nods to the Coen brothers here. Morty Kellerman's driving a truck that says Treehorn on the door, which is a callback to The Big Lebowski. Jackie Treehorn, as you know, can make a hell of a White Russian. And then, of course, we hear the Fargo theme after Dr. Senator is killed for the first time this season, and I think it really did add to this scene. So I'm curious where you're at. Let me know in the comments what you think. What do you think of this season so far? What do you think about the problems I'm having? How are you feeling about the future of the season? Do you think it's all going to come together? And what do you want to see as that happens? Please like the video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.